Welcome back to the Math Actually podcast. If this is your first time joining us, we are in the middle of a powerful 4-part series with math educator and national speaker Gina Rivera. And we're diving deep into how we build student agency, that sense of ownership, voice, and confidence that we're looking for in our classrooms. In episode 1, Gina walked us through the power of correction stations and how small tweaks can help students take real ownership of their learning. So if you missed it, go back and give it a listen first. But today, we are zooming in on something that can shift your classroom tomorrow: student discourse. How do we get kids talking, sharing ideas, or building their math voice? Because when students talk, they think more deeply, they retain more, and they begin to see themselves as capable mathematicians. So whether your classroom is full of big talkers or quiet thinkers, Gina's going to walk us through how to create space for every voice, how to model rich questioning, and how to use routines that make discussions more than just talk, but rather a tool for learning. So let's jump into episode 2 and let's get it started today. Hello, welcome back, Gina. I am so excited to have you here with us. And if this is your first time listening to this series, we're here with Gina Rivera, who is absolutely amazing, sharing with us strategies on student ownership, students taking ownership of their learning, student agency. And if you missed episode 1, you need to go back and check that out because you missed a lot of great stuff. But in this particular episode, we're going to continue talking about student agency. And we're going to chat a little bit because we know that talking and sharing ideas in math class has become very important for helping students to take charge of their learning. And I think in today's classroom, teachers aren't necessarily just giving answers anymore. They're facilitating conversations that help everyone learn together. Or at least hopefully that's what we're seeing more of. So I would love for you to help us to understand the why getting students to talk is such a key part of growing their agency.
So I would say, well, first I always lead with something some people have heard and some people haven't heard, but I'm a multilingual learner, and I always say that math is a language. So as math teachers, we all speak math, so we understand all of this math terminology that sometimes people don't understand if they haven't taught math or they haven't spent time in a math classroom. So the reason why discussion is so important is because in math, we have so many specific terms that we use only in the math classroom. And so when students are in discussion, that's the way they really understand those words. So the more they talk about them, the more they're able to internalize them. So the discussions in the math classroom do a couple of things. Number one, they help students to really understand math vocabulary at a higher level. That's one way, because the way that we learn new words is not by the teacher saying them, but by students saying them. And we know the research says they need a lot of repetition to be able to internalize a word. So if you're learning a brand new math word, for example, an isosceles triangle, right? That's something that kids have to know what that is in math. Well, it's not about the teacher saying it, it's how do I incorporate it as a student into this classroom to really understand what it means. The second reason why discussion is so important is because mathematicians are able to discuss their ideas so they can share their strategies. So as they're working through their math problems, for them to be able to share those ideas, it's important that they have a command of student discourse and really feel empowered to be able to not just share the idea, but know how to share the idea. Sometimes students are shy because they just don't understand, like, how do I share this? Or they'll say to me, oh, I just did it in my head, but I'm not able to share my understanding. But through discourse and hearing other students share, you're also learning how to do that through modeling. And then the final way I think that's really, really important is discussion also helps us to learn from others. So if I'm in a math classroom and I hear other students share their strategies, it helps to move my thinking. Because, maybe there's something that's shared that I'm like, oh my gosh, I never thought about doing it like that. I know I've taken strategies from so many classmates over the years. And I'm a better mathematician because I heard them share an idea in a different way than maybe my teacher shared it. So discussion in math classroom is really critical because we know that all learning is social. So if all learning is social, then discussion is part of that. The final piece that I'll say is it's kind of like storytelling, right? So we know that the way that knowledge is passed on from the start of time is really through storytelling and discussion. So that's the way we learn and pass on knowledge. It's the same thing for math classrooms. The way that we learn and pass on knowledge is through discussion, because that is a kind of form of storytelling, but about my math and my strategies and what I've learned.
No, I love that. And I love how you said how I love how you connected the storytelling, and I love how you talked about learning is social, because I totally agree. And it kind of leads me to this question though, because I think sometimes when we say learning is social, well, some of us might say, well, I'm kind of an introvert, or I'm kind of antisocial, or things like that. And I'm asked that sometimes because I tend to be a social person. And I think that when we say learning is social, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone who considers themselves quiet, or someone who considers themselves antisocial or introverted, it doesn't mean that they're not learning socially as well. So I guess my question would be, as a teacher with a classroom full of diverse learners, people at different levels of comfort and different skill levels, what strategies could you use to ensure that every student, no matter where they are, feels empowered and able to speak up in both whole class discussions and group discussions?
So that's a really great question. And I want to lift up, like, I always go back to the definition of discourse. So Dr. Tutita Casa did a great job in her research explaining what discourse is. And discourse is not just oral, it's also written. So once you start to hear that, you're like, well, wait a second. So I could be on the quiet side, but I could still engage in discourse through writing. I could write down my ideas, and that still has value. So when I think about like the wide range of learners in my middle school classroom or my elementary classrooms, I have students who feel totally confident sharing their ideas and know how to do that well. Then I have some that have the ideas but are not really sure how to do that. So I might provide them some sentence stems to kind of get them going. So I might provide like the beginning couple of words and maybe a word bank of some math words to really help them share their ideas. So, like, I'm not shy, but I don't exactly know how to enter a conversation, so I could scaffold that way. If I'm super on the shy side, because I definitely had students on the shy side, I literally would hand them a post it because I could see them working, right? And I'm like, you need to write that down. I know you don't want to say it. Can I at least share the idea? And I would always ask their permission. And if they were good with that, I would help them with the sharing, or their partner would uplift it as a compliment to say, wow, Gina doesn't want to talk right now, but she has this really awesome way on how to multiply fractions, and she let me share it. So that's also another way of doing that. And then the final way is I had a lot of multilingual learners in my classroom. So I'm lucky because I'm bilingual, but now with the translation apps and AI, you could get them, if you see that they're doing things right, get them to talk into a Google app, write it and say it in their home language, and then you could see it and you could share out their brilliance across the room. So that gives you so many avenues to really think about discourse. Like, we want every voice to at some point be elevated in the room. That's really the goal of all of us. So some students, are quick to that. But then our challenge as teachers is, how do we find ways to elevate those that are either introverted or accessing the language, maybe are just struggling with how to enter the conversation. So all of those practical ideas like sentence stems, using AI or Google Translate to get their ideas into your phone so then you can read them off of a screen, a post-it note. There's so many ways to still engage in discourse, because discourse has a big definition. It's, yes, speaking, but it's also writing and listening to the ideas of others.
No, I love that. And I love that you had mentioned or spent some time on the strategy with the post it note, because one thing that I have personally thought of in the past is those quiet students that either don't know how to enter a conversation, don't feel comfortable entering that conversation. And the fact that I love how you had said two things about that, because I think it's really important for people to really understand. The first thing you did was you asked permission, and I think that's really brilliant, because many times I think we want the kids to share, and you're so brilliant and you're wonderful, but by asking permission, you've now given them the power to say yes or no, right? And
Mhm.
by doing that, it almost makes them feel very valued. And I loved that, number one. And then number two, letting their partner share it in the way that you had explained, where, oh, that this student, let's say Gina, really understands this really well and gave me permission to share her brilliance, right? Well, that now puts this student on a pedestal without having them to feel uncomfortable if they are a little bit shy or uncomfortable with sharing. So I love that particular one really stood out to me because I have a lot of students that are quiet and I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to get them to share their brilliance. And I thought of that right away, like, oh, I think I'm going to use that strategy because it really is one that stuck out to me. So that was great. So then I guess coming from that, how would you, let's think about when we want to have these discussions in our classrooms. As a teacher, we know that we would need to prepare for those, right? It's not necessarily something we could do all of the time just off the cuff or just kind of wing it. So my question would be, what preparation and instruction do you or do us as teachers need to provide to empower meaningful student-driven math discussions? So thanks so much for that. I loved how you had shared some specific question stems, and I guess my question then would go a little bit deeper into, because when it comes to math discussions, I'd love to talk a little bit about math language routines. If you could dive a little bit into what they are and what are they exactly, and then when and where would you recommend using them?
So the math language routines came out of Stanford University, and there's 8 of them. I've used all of them at some point. They were designed specifically for multilingual learners, so students who are proficient in one language and are learning a second. So, for example, I might be fluent in Spanish and I'm learning English. That would make me a multilingual learner. And so the routines themselves are embedded. I know they're in the Reveal program because they're so powerful. And what they really help teachers do is learn routines. So just like we have number routines to help students understand number, these routines help to elevate discussion. So there's a couple of them. One of my favorite ones is it's called Stronger and Clearer. So when you're working on a concept or a vocabulary word, you start with asking the kids, okay, what do you think this means? So just getting that first, like, what do you think the word fraction means? What's a fraction? So they write it down. Then the next step is you check in with a partner and say, okay, what do you know about fractions? And so you and I would get together and we would like put together a better definition because you know something about fractions that I don't know. We could include pictures in our definition. We could write down words. We could give examples. And then our group joins another group. And now we're a group of 4 and we clarify even further. So once we've gotten all together, then we get to hear some share outs from the class. And then in the final one, we're like, okay, how do I really refine this? Now that I've heard all this, so I've heard from myself, I've heard from my partner, I've heard from a couple of my classmates, how do I refine that? And that becomes the stronger and clearer protocol. So usually what I'll do is I'll launch it in the beginning and just say, write down your initial definition. Then we'll move through the lesson. I'll pause it and say, okay, check in with a partner. How would you refine that definition based on what we've learned so far? And at the end, once we've had our closure and we've consolidated our lesson, let's get that final definition. If it's something like a big idea like fractions, obviously that would take more time because that's a big concept. But for a smaller word, it works really well. So stronger and clearer is an awesome way to just engage kids in discussion. A second one, which kids love and teachers don't do enough, is if you have chart paper, something called collected display is something you can use. So you could put a problem up on the board or like an image. So it could be a mathematical image or a problem from Reveal. And then you work through the problem. And then what you do is you collect and display all of their work, but it has to be in their own writing. So or their own words. So either they're going to share something and you write it down, but then you write their name next to it. So like if Chuck, you came up with something, I'd write down what you came up with and then I'd write your name next to it. Or I might say, is it okay if I display your paper? And they'll say yes or no. And if they're okay with it, I literally take a piece of tape, put it on the chart paper. And then at the top, I'll put the learning target and we will collect and display all of this brilliance. And that becomes a new anchor chart in my class. So instead of me having the prefabricated anchor chart, what happens is during that collect and display, kids are really excited about talking because guess what? They want to be on that anchor chart. I haven't really met a kid who doesn't want their name up in the class. So the collect and display really gets them talking because I'll tell them, I'm going to be listening for really awesome answers because we're going to collect and display your brilliance on this chart that, by the way, is going to go up in the room. So it's that public recognition of collect and display that kids really like. And it really decenters the teacher and it really centers students in a way that's so powerful and gets them talking because they really want to be part of that anchor chart.
That's cool. And I agree. I think celebrating students whenever we have the chance can be extremely powerful just in the whole learning process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. So I guess you had mentioned Reveal. So just a little side question, but I'm curious if you could walk us through maybe an example of your favorite math language routine from Reveal that teachers could easily use in their class tomorrow if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm. So my favorite one of all time is definitely the 3 reads strategy that can be used with any story problem within Reveal. And basically it takes a complex word problem and breaks it up into 3 different reads. Now, in the literacy world, they always read passages. If you're really doing things well, you read it 3 times. The first time is to get the gist, the second time is to build a little bit more understanding, and the third is to really clarify. Well, in math, this is the way that it works. So if you're reading a story problem, for read number 1, if I have the problem displayed, I cross off or block the question, I block off the numbers, and then all we're doing is we're reading the problem and we're making sense of the context. So many times kids just jump to the numbers or the question. I'm like, no, you don't even know where you are or what's happening. So the only protocol for the first read is where are you and what's happening in this problem. So I might be looking at like, I don't know, a parking lot problem with different numbers of cars, but I'll just say to the kids, where are you, what's happening? And they might say, I know I'm in a parking lot, I know there's cars, I don't know how many cars, and I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, that's read 1, but does everybody know what they are? Okay, make a picture in your head, make a movie. Read number 2 is I then uncover the numbers, and now they're able to see, are we working with fractions, decimals, large numbers, small numbers? So now they just have these two numbers. Does everybody know the quantity? Okay, now we know how many, so we'll write those numbers down. And then I'll have them kind of guess, like, oh, what do you think the question is going to be? And they make some guesses. But then on that third guess, on that third read, we finally read the question. Well, the nice thing is, because I've blocked off the numbers in the first read and the question, and blocked off the question in the second read, they're making lots of sense of it. So by that third read, they finally know where I am, what's happening, what are the numbers. So when they go to jump to looking, what do they actually want me to figure out? They already know so much about the problem even before answering it. So that's what the power is behind the 3 read strategy. It's funny because I would teach the kids the 3 reads, and so I would do it on chart paper, or I would put it on my smartboard and I'd block things off. Like I would just take a pen, right, and just cross off all this stuff and then erase it as we reveal it. And I always wondered, like, would it transfer onto an assessment? And what was interesting is I would see kids on assessments, they would take their pencil and they'd scratch out the numbers and they would scratch out the question, and they would read it, and then they would erase, and then you could see the numbers show up, and then they would erase the question and finally answer. So there's so much power to the 3 reads, because if we think about it, what do we tell kids? Reread the problem, but we don't give them a system. This gives them the system and what the look for is for each one. So what happens is now they get 3 chances to understand the problem, 3 chances to make sense of it all, and 3 chances to really focus in on what is it asking me to do, so when it's time for me to actually solve, I know what I'm solving for.
That's awesome. And thanks for breaking that down, because I think by the way that you broke it down makes it actually quite easy to kind of implement right away for teachers. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to say thank you for doing that. And then I guess I wanted to just end this episode kind of like I said before. If you would be willing to give us, I know that there's a lot of routines that we talked about. There was some cool tools that we used to spark classroom discussions that teachers could use tomorrow. But I was really stuck on those sentence stems that you had mentioned, or those, I guess, sentence stems or question stems, whatever they might be called. And I'd love for you to share maybe your favorite or your top 3 to 5 question stems or sentence stems that you think would be really useful that teachers could use right away to help them when sparking these discussions.
So one of the things I always work on with teachers is helping kids to ask questions is actually a skill that kids have to be taught. And culturally, if you're not taught to ask questions of adults, they actually don't even have that skill. So I remember Beth Kobet talked about this very awesome book called The Most Beautiful Question. And I love that because, like, in my culture, I'm not really allowed to question authority or allowed to question adults. So the idea of asking questions is far removed from who I am as a person. But yet you see those kids in class who are so curious and ask like a litany of questions. Well, some of that comes from, that's cultivated at home. So I would say the most powerful thing teachers can do is give them question stems that help kids ask really good questions. So for example, like if they're working on a problem, like, where did you begin? Where are you getting stuck? What do you think the next step is? How do you know this is the right answer or the right strategy? So asking really powerful questions of their peers help them to then hear from others how they're thinking, which builds their own mathematical thinking. So there's a lot of power in asking questions. I think that's something that's actually a skill that's underutilized in classrooms. And if teachers could provide those just right questions for kids, they would know how to engage with their peers in a dialogue that's much more richer than the dialogues that they have. Like right now, if I was to think back to my middle school classes, the kids would just be like, what did you get? Well, that's not like a really rich question, but when you ask like, what did you do on step 2? Or how did you start that problem? Or how did you think of that strategy? That's a much more open question that you can ask your peers that gets them talking and excited and gets you learning about their thinking and vice versa.
And you're right. I think that sometimes we might not realize or know how to do that. So we need to take that first step in understanding it so that we can then teach our students. So I love how you broke that down. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to end the episode with kind of talking a little bit about that. So thanks again for such a great episode. We're going to be back with our third episode where we're going to really talk about students writing their own problems. So I can't wait for that one to kind of pick your brain a little bit on how we can even increase student ownership more by helping them understand how to write their own problems. So we'll do that with our next episode, but thanks so much for this conversation, Gina. It has been great. So that's a wrap on episode 2 of our student agency series with Gina Rivera. And what a conversation. If you've ever wondered how to help quiet students find their voice or how to move beyond the "so what did you get" kind of math talk, Gina literally just gave us the roadmap. From sentence stems to partner sharing to powerful routines, we now see how we can help students feel seen, heard, and capable. And as Gina reminded us, math is a language, and all learners deserve a chance to speak it. So if you try just one thing this week, model a question stem. Let students build the anchor chart or give your quiet thinkers a post-it and a partner to amplify their ideas. Every little step builds confidence. And remember, you don't need louder voices, you just need more voices. So give every student a way in. Now we'll see you next time for episode 3, where Gina will share how students can take their ownership even further by writing their own math problems. You don't want to miss it. See you next week.